Shalom and welcome. It's another episode of our podcast.
TBN Israel, the podcast.
That's right. I'm Shoshani and this is Yair, Pinto.
The second and only.
We're both the personal. And we are excited to go deep in content about what happens in this part of the world. And Yair, we have some interesting content today.
Yeah, definitely. Today we're going to talk about the Rafah situation, the border crossing tunnels between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, and the Philadelphi Corridor, which is now under Israeli control.
Yeah, we always say in this show, and I'm saying this to all our viewers, both people who are viewing and people who are only listening, we have this format exactly for this type of content. Because this topic cannot be fully understood just by the headline.
Yeah.
The headline only tells you a small portion of the story.
And we see it every day.
Yeah.
Like these headlines.
Yeah, exactly.
And
really getting what happened there and the ramifications of what happened, the effect it will have on the Israeli-Egyptian relations, what it says about the Egyptians, what it says about the Hamas. We need the time that we have today to go deep into that.
Yeah. And also, we like to go into the head of the other side to see why they are doing it. What do they gain? What's their point of view into the situation and into making their decisions? So that's why we can better understand why people do what they do.
So maybe we start with there. This week was an embarrassing week for the Egyptians.
Yes.
Really embarrassing week for the Egyptians. And if I had to collectively frame how they felt as a people, they were a government that was caught red-handed. And I'll explain in short. The IDF has entered into the Rafah, which is the southern part of Gaza area, but specifically what we call in military jargon the Philadelphi Corridor, which is the corridor that connects between Sinai on the west, Egypt, and on the eastern side, the Palestinian Authority or the Hamas Authority and the Gaza Strip.
It's basically a road along the border.
It's a road, and we've cut through that road in recent weeks. And as we're working on that road and sort of uncovering what's going on there, more than 50 smuggling tunnels were found just in this last week.
Yeah, between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, which is a huge part of Egypt, mainly controlled by, Bedouins that live there, and then there are some Egyptian police and military there. More and more recently, even though according to the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, this area should be without a lot of military presence.
Should be demilitarized.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big embarrassment. Why is that an embarrassment? Because Egypt claimed they have no knowledge of the tunnels. They say that they didn't know that there were this amount or any terror tunnels, which is not true because we even have videos that were exposed that see that Egyptian police are assisting the smugglers in infiltrating goods and other things into the Gaza Strip. And there's also reports of Egypt themselves flooding tunnels with water, with seawater. Yeah. So we have some misinformation and embarrassment for the Egyptians on this side. But in general, now what is happening is the IDF is bringing forces into the Philadelphi Corridor. So the IDF is controlling the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. And at the moment we did that, the Egyptians stopped the transfer of aid trucks into the Gaza Strip, which is a very big problem because that was a major entry point for hundreds of aid trucks every day. The majority of them went immediately to Hamas control. And that is the reason the IDF is there, in order to prevent that entry of goods and stuff into the Gaza Strip.
Let's zoom out for a second just to help frame this conversation. So we've been at war with the Gaza Strip with Hamas since October 7th. We entered into the Gaza Strip in November. The main ground maneuver took place for the first 2.5 months. And since, let's say, late March and onward, up to a couple weeks ago, things were relatively relaxed as far as the army in large maneuvering in the Gaza Strip. The last big stronghold that was left in Hamas hands and Hamas control was the southern district of the Gaza Strip, which is an elongated north-south or sort of north-south strip. And on the southern part of it is a town called Rafah that concentrated several 100,000 people who live there on a regular basis, inhabitants of that city, along with over 1 million refugees that fled from other parts of the Gaza Strip. And they've been waiting there. Hamas has been holding on to that place with very large numbers of combatants, a large volume of population. And the last sort of move that the IDF had to make was take over Rafah. And the way we did that was first we cut off the border crossing, then we cut off the corridor running above to the north of Rafah, and then we cut the border fence or the border path that connects Rafah in the Palestinian Hamas side to Rafah on the other side, which is the Egyptian-controlled Sinai side.
Yes.
That's how we got there today.
Yeah, and by the way, Rafah was a very poor city before the war started.
That's even worse now.
And just imagine needing to feed and house more than 1 million Palestinians in the recent 7 months. It became super, super hard for the humanitarian situation there. Very poor health conditions, not enough food. It's run by a terrorist organization. It was a very tough situation. And the IDF knows, and that's part of the main goals of this war, that in order to destroy Hamas, we must have boots on the ground inside Rafah. We must have soldiers there. We must go into the tunnels, each tunnel, and then find the hostages that potentially are being kept in Rafah, together with the leaders of Hamas. Because that's the last place where they have to hide. Because the IDF already basically took control of the other areas of the Gaza Strip. Okay, so in order to do that, the IDF had to address the issue of the civilian population. Over 1 million civilians that were, moved there in order to protect them from the IDF offensive against Hamas in the other parts of the Gaza Strip. And now the IDF opened corridors in order to move them back up north, safe zones. Some in the northern parts, some in the northwestern parts. And we've been building, 10 cities for the past few months in order to do that, amongst other programs that were funded either by Israel, either by the United States, either by the United Arab Emirates. And according to reports that we have today, we believe that so far 950,000 citizens already moved to the north. That's also a huge amount.
It's a large portion of the refugee population.
So fast. So
one other big piece is, and to understand the Rafah story, is the fact that is the weapon fact. And understanding Gaza, like what the IDF found coming into the Gaza Strip, there was always this claim thrown around saying, there's the combatants and then there are uninvolved civilians, right? They keep the international community, the Palestinians kept saying this in the first months of the war.
It's very hard to tell who's who.
What did the IDF find when it entered Rafah, or it entered the Gaza Strip? It found in almost every single home, in every single compound, in every single
school,
in every single school, in every single tunnel, in the entirety of the Gaza Strip, weapon stashes, weapon depots, missile depots, inside children's beds, underneath their beds, machine guns, hand grenades, just like a never-ending flow of weaponry hidden everywhere throughout the Gaza Strip. And where did all that weaponry come from? It came through the Rafah crossing. And most of it, and this is for now many years, for over 10 years, most of that weaponry comes through illegally. It is smuggled in tunnels. And when I say tunnel, people probably imagine something that you would sort of shimmy through.
You can drive in some of them.
Some of them have trains on tracks that cross back and forth.
I found a tunnel with a train on track in Khan Yunis.
Really?
Yeah. Like tracks, a train. It's like, old school. Really cool.
So again, this is on an industrial scale. Not something where you're dragging a sandbag through.
No.
It's where you're driving entire vehicles through. And those tunnels were used both for goods that would serve the civilian population, whatever they are, but also for weaponry. And weaponry in incredibly large amounts. Weaponry sent both from friends of Hamas, such as ISIS back in the day, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, but also from the Iranians, who were illegally smuggling it into the Gaza Strip. So Israel, to end the Hamas reign of terror in the Gaza Strip, we have no choice but to cut off the illegal lifeline of weaponry. Well, it's not a lifeline, it's a death line. It's the illegal death line that goes into Hamas territory in these underground tunnels. And what's really fascinating here, Tomel's giving us more information here in the background. He's thinking faster than writing faster than we can think. Thank you, Tomer, our producer. Is that the majority of the Hamas tunnels are still intact in the Gaza Strip, which I find to be incredible. I mean, I wasn't there in person in recent years,
listen,
but
there's just so many tunnels, and it takes so long to destroy one tunnel.
Yeah.
And to destroy it properly is even harder, because so you can destroy and then they can just dig the exit again, and that tunnel becomes operational again, because some of them are more than 20 meters underground.
Yeah, which is very deep.
It's a complete different level. But I think that what we learned from this experience, that Israel cannot trust anyone else in protecting our borders. So if Israel does not have a border, you know, with some area like Hamas, like the Gaza Strip has a border with Egypt, that border is not secured. And that's why the majority, 90% or something like that, of the smuggling weapons are smuggled through the Rafah crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. And now we have military presence there, and that these smuggling attempts are, I don't know if completely halted, or at least
for the
significantly, you know, going down.
Let's go back to the embarrassment factor on the Egyptian side.
Okay.
I think we didn't fully explain the whole thing. So the IDF goes in, takes over the corridor that splits between Sinai under Egyptian control, and Rafah. Rafah exists on both sides, but Rafah on the Hamas side. And when the IDF takes over that territory, they find at least, and I think the words "at least" are important here, at least 50 smuggling tunnels. And what that says about the Egyptians, and this is where it gets interesting and also tricky on a relational level, it says about the Egyptians a couple things. They or knew as a government about the depth of corruption and the depth of smuggling that was going across.
And they just didn't deal with it.
And they chose not to deal with it. And I think that's the key word, chose not to deal with it. Or, which is possibly worse.
Can be even worse,
They didn't know as a government, and officials at a high rank in their army or in their government knew about it and were doing it for corruption reasons, as in kickbacks,
receiving
in cash, receiving bribes from the Hamas, from the enemies of the state, to allow it, or a combination of the two.
And Hamas is an enemy of Egypt.
100%.
It's important to say that, because the Muslim Brotherhood was basically overturned by the Egyptian military,
which is the current government,
the country in Egypt. So Egypt is very afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood regaining its control in Egypt. So they don't want Hamas terrorists flood into the Sinai Peninsula and gain more power there. That's one of the reasons that Egypt does not want Palestinians to move into the Sinai Peninsula.
And I think something always worth mentioning is the fact that the West or Western viewers might imagine terrorism is something that terrorists from a certain organization or country do against others from a different country and a different nationality. But the reality is the vast majority of extremist Muslim terrorism is Muslims on Muslims. Is Sunni against Shia, is Shia against Sunni, is literally one nation to its neighboring nation. And this has happened in numbers throughout Africa, throughout the Middle East. The Egyptian government, and I think the scope of this is important to really grasp the story. The Egyptian government for about 10 years dealt with an ongoing wave of domestic terrorism that took place inside Sinai. Domestic terrorism to the degree of armed brigades, I guess. I don't know what the word to describe it. Armed terrorist cells.
Well, ISIS,
but they would attack Egyptian soldiers. And destroy,
bases,
attack and take over and murder everyone inside a military outpost belonging to the Egyptian army. And they'd attack convoys of the Egyptian army traveling on main highways in Sinai and kill everyone in the convoy. And it was so bad for a while that the Egyptians called on the aid of Israel and the United States to help them with intelligence and weaponry. And we actually scaled back on some of our peace agreement limitations
to allow them to
fly helicopters, fighter planes, and tanks inside the Sinai, because they couldn't deal with the level of terrorism that was happening there. I mean, just not 5 years ago, they had a wave of terrorist attacks on hotels within Egypt that, it decimated their tourism industry. So this is not an Israeli issue with Hamas.
No.
This is very much the Egyptians dealing with a huge internal problem that comes from throughout the extremist Muslim world, and Hamas is part of that.
Yes.
And when you understand that, it's clear why they should have responded to it, why they should prevent the Hamas from smuggling weapons, definitely at this kind of scale, and how big of a event this is on a diplomatic level and also internally on the Egyptian level.
Yeah, definitely. So what's the basically the historical context to all of this?
The history of Sinai. One, tunnels aren't something new to Gaza. And that's important to know. Tunnels exist in Gaza since the beginning of the modern age and possibly before that for various reasons. The main one being is that the depth of the aquifers in the underground water is relatively low and it allows tunneling in many places.
It's very easy to dig there.
And and the second one is the type of soil. The type of limestone rock is it's a combination of limestone and sand rock that's very easy to cave through, and it's also it's soft enough to cave through easily, and it's hard enough to support weight to a certain size. And so there have always been a lot of caves, and since there was a border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip in 1967, since then, but also even previously there were smuggling issues there. There have been tunnels going back and forth between...
Also for drugs and like other stuff.
Exactly.
Not
it's not
weapons.
We always say in Israel the distance between terrorism and crime is just choice.
Yeah, it's a different way of getting the money and a different purpose.
Yeah, so tunnels have existed between Egypt and the Gaza Strip for many, many years, but the size of them has gone up and up and up. And again, everything always not everything. Many things can be understood through money.
Yeah.
And when you understand the money trail in the Gaza Strip, much of the Gaza economy is or foreign aid that is stolen
to help the civilian population, but is stolen by Hamas terrorists.
Or before that, the PLO, the Yasser Arafat's organization, let's call it that.
Yeah.
And another big part of it is the illegal economy. And the illegal economy is trading in rights for employees or Palestinian day laborers to enter into Israel. So people will sell those rights for a percentage of their profits or a flat rate. It's the tunnels coming in from the Sinai Peninsula into there, where the Hamas taxed the tunnel owners. But the people who dug the tunnels, it was such a lucrative event for so many years that they would form in the same way you would form a company with shareholders.
They do visas that go through the tunnels.
It's like, hey, we have an investment opportunity. Hey guys, let's invest.
Let's dig here
in a tunnel. No, they pay the guys who built it. They didn't dig themselves. They pool their money. Let's say it costs $500,000. They pool the money, and a team comes in of experts. They dig the tunnel, and then the families that own the tunnel, they're the ones who make the profit, and they share their profits with Hamas.
So
it's hugely important to the economy of the Gaza Strip. Hugely important, and you can't understand Gaza and what's happening there today
without the tunnels.
Yeah. So again, to reshape today's story, the Egyptians are afraid of Hamas. The Egyptians are at odds with Hamas on the ideological, a financial, and a security level. And Hamas is at war with Israel, and the Egyptians have been terrified, and terrified is the key word, of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip flooding into Sinai and them losing control over it. So they've been building fortifications, and they've been doubling up on the wall. They have 2 sets of walls now, 2 lines of walls, and flooding the tunnels, and all these different things, only to find out when the IDF goes into Rafah that there are at least 50 tunnels under the ground, and the Egyptians had no grasp whatsoever over what was happening underground.
Yeah, of the magnitude.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to frame the tunnel situation in Gaza at large, there's tunnels that lead from Rafah all the way to the center part of the Gaza Strip, and there are tunnels connecting, and there's like underground networks of tunnels connecting between tens of kilometers. So Hamas terrorists basically can transport communications, ammunitions, goods, fighters, people from the northern part to the southern part of the Gaza Strip within these tunnels.
Yeah.
And that is also one of the reasons that we see fighting and terrorism emerge in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, areas that the IDF thought it cleared out of Hamas terrorists.
It had cleared.
Yeah, but they brought new people. Either
they were able to travel freely, so they brought back their weapons. Yeah,
exactly. Either they were able to travel freely, or they also recruited young Palestinians into their ranks and armed them. So you can see that the level of, like the military level and the tactical ability of these fighters is less than what the Hamas terrorists were at the beginning, because it's basically
new
people
recruits,
that were not trained by Iran or by Hezbollah and came back to the Gaza Strip. It's people that I bet they had like a very speedy training of how to operate an RPG or an AK-47, which is a missile launcher and a
assault rifle.
an assault rifle. And then they are just being sent to the street, either because of a financial reason or because of an ideological reason. Maybe, you know, the parent, the uncle, was killed by the IDF because he was a Hamas terrorist, and then they want the revenge. That's also part of the psychological warfare that is hard to deal with, and is hard to, we are having a hard, problem to think of the day after, because how can we have peace with the Palestinians there if the father, the grandfather, the uncle, all of them were part of the Hamas ecosystem, and many of them were killed during the battles against the IDF and against Israel?
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good question. We're not going to be able to answer it in this podcast, but I'll just say this. There have been cases in history where radicalized societies were able to change. It is possible. It only happens...
Takes a generation, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, it can happen. It only happens when the country or the people group or the nation on a collective level decide that they're going to repent for what they did and publicly admit to making a mistake. And that's not something you see within Islam, and it's not something you see within the Palestinian society, and definitely not within Hamas. Because if you look at radicalized Germany post-World War II, there is a public going back, and I don't want to say shame because it's too simplified of a term, but there is a reckoning of we made mistakes, and as a people we go against Nazism, we go against anti-Semitism, and we will go away from that route. The Japanese go back, and this, again, it's public. We disown, so to speak, what previously happened, and we're going to be a different kind of people. That shift has to happen, and you're correct. Today, the guy's name is Micha Gudman. You know who he is? He writes.
I heard the name. I don't.
If people here want to, I'll say this to the viewers at home. If you want to read some extracurricular
homework, you're giving them homework?
Extracurricular activity, I'll give you 5 points for reading this book. There's a book called Narrowing. Let me look it up in English. It's called Narrowing the Conflict. In the book, he basically says, you can't end the conflict overnight. But what you can do is take steps to reduce or diminish or minimize a conflict. And if you take these steps in a generation, let's say 20, 25, 30 years, you'll have a basis for a conversation that isn't so volatile emotionally that you could have that. Anyway, we're deviating from the topic. We'll go back.
We are talking about Rafah, the tunnels, and the smuggling network of Hamas. Okay, so let's say, the IDF is now working very hard on destroying each one of these tunnels. And listen, that's what I've been doing in the Gaza Strip. It's super hard just to pinpoint the entry points of these tunnels. And moreover, each of these entry points is connected to a wider network. It's kind of the trunk of the tunnel, like a tree, it has all the leaves,
little branches,
and then you need to find the core and destroy that place, because that's where the leaders are staying, and that's where the communication centers are, the weapons manufacturing laboratories, and all these things. Laboratories, Well,
it depends if you're British or American.
Exactly. So that's the plan, and it takes a long time, while you need to do it in a very wise and sensitive way, because
it's booby-trapped
and hostages. You don't want to destroy a tunnel with the hostages inside. So you need to understand which tunnels we can just destroy, and others we need to do sophisticated operations, sending in our K9 units and the robots and elite units inside the tunnels in order to clear them out manually, which is super hard, because that's the whole goal of Hamas. So
it's to draw you in,
draw you in. They have blast doors with places to put a rifle on one side, and then on the other side, the Israeli soldiers are kind of trapped. It's kind of like in Indiana Jones, just an advanced movie with terrorists and bombs.
But you're going back to that thought of what has Hamas been doing with its money and resources? And the answer is they are a death cult. They are a death cult, and they dedicate their money, their resources, their time, their intelligence, and they are intelligent people. Everything on a national level to death and destruction. All of it. And so what they've done with the aid that they received is build tunnels and bombs and weaponize. What they've done with the education is, instead of training people and giving them a vocation, They create terrorists and they train them in acts of brutal violence.
Yeah, we saw videos of schools training Hamas in Hamas camps to train teenagers how to kidnap IDF soldiers, go inside the tunnels, and then disappear with the soldier. You know, it's crazy.
No, it's evil on a diabolical and spiritual level. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And then all of this happens on the border with Egypt, which is already a loaded conversation.
Yes.
And the Egyptians, we talked about this in a previous episode, the Egyptians are already very sensitive to Israeli IDF presence close to the border. And the Egyptians are already they're making complaints and threats, and they're showing videos of how they're going to attack the IDF, all to say, guys, stop. Don't come anywhere near. We don't want this problem on our border. And then the IDF goes into Rafah.
And finds all these tunnels.
Yeah. And also now we have this multiple layer problem, where on the one hand, we have this incredible loss of trust with the Egyptians, where we're not sure of one of two things, or of the intent, the truthfulness of the intent, or the honesty of the intent of the Egyptian government, or of their ability to control what happens with their own country.
Yeah.
And them on the other side they're very concerned about the Israeli forces now understanding the extent of the smuggling going across the border and saying, well, maybe we need to step a little over the border to stop the problem. And now the Egyptians they're observing very carefully. They're making international complaints. Yeah. It's a diplomatic incident. They're highly concerned about where this goes next.
Yeah, also if you destroy a tunnel that reaches into the Sinai Peninsula, into Egypt territory, you're doing operations that are cross-bordering.
Yeah.
Let's say our soldiers go into a tunnel to find hostages, and that's already inside Egypt, you know? So how do you communicate?
And then you're violating the peace agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a really hard mechanism to find. Also, you don't want the leaders of Hamas to escape through these tunnels to Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's another challenge that we have.
I think also the corruption thing is something worth delaying on. And that is to say, and this will sound, well, there's no nice way to say this. Some societies have systemic problems. And people have been very generous in pointing out the systemic problems within Jews and Jewish population. I'll say within certain countries in the Middle East, there's a problem with corruption, as in the wheels of the economy don't move without someone oiling those wheels, and without someone paying bakshish. Corruption. Egypt is known for that, both on the low level, as in your encounter with a government clerk or a policeman.
Yeah, you need to pay him, give him a bit extra.
Exactly, you need to pay him something. You need to pay him something like that. It's even happened to me personally in visiting Egypt, where they threaten you and expect to be paid for something in return.
Yeah, it's already part of the budget when you plan to go into Egypt. Okay, this is what it costs. This is the bribe, and then you can go inside.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards about what happened. Anyway, all that to say is now we're finding something where clearly there was a very big financial incentive. I mean, a powerful incentive where it's hundreds, if not billions of dollars of goods crossing a border illegally.
Yeah.
And to say that someone high up in Egypt didn't know about it is just not feasible.
Yeah.
Someone did. And it indicates, it points out the level of corruption that's rampant. Is it rampant or rampant? It's that exists.
First time I'm hearing this word, by the way.
Let's say that exists. We're both Israelis here learning English. So. It indicates the level of corruption that exists in their society. And think about this, if I'm a country and my enemy is across this border, and then someone in my government, high up in the government or high up in the army, which is the same thing in Egypt, is allowing that enemy to be armed on a daily basis with the best of the weapons in crazy volumes. Yeah. And those same people, their friends, their ideological brothers, were killing my own soldiers just a couple years back. They were blowing up hotels in my country just a couple years back. That's and then I find out that someone in the government is allowing that to happen for bribe. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal.
No, definitely. And by the way, okay, so let's, I think, summarize the IDF's objectives for the Rafah operation.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, we have already reports that the United States removed its objection to an IDF ground operation inside Rafah, and this is because of the very high numbers of civilians being moved into safe zones in other areas. Okay, so that's already a huge hurdle that the IDF passed. The goals are to dismantle the remaining Hamas battalions inside Rafah.
Yes.
Okay, so according to reports, there are about 4 battalions, but they're a bit bigger than the battalions we've seen in the north because many of the fighters escaped hiding as civilians and moved south and joined the battalions and reinforced them. Okay, so destroy the remaining battalions, and these battalions are still active because every day we still have rockets being fired from Gaza towards Israel. This rocket fire has not stopped since the beginning of this war. It's very important to share that these rockets are not helping Hamas to fight the IDF. These rockets are aimed at the civilians, at the citizens of Israel, like in the home front.
Okay, so Yair, what does it take to stop the rockets?
So in order to stop a rocket, by the way, you have to be on the rocket launcher itself. You have to be in the ground, in the house. These rocket launchers are covered by either bushes, other covering sand. It's impossible to see them from the sky, from like a satellite view, from an airplane picture. You have to go every square meter and find, and every tube that looks a little bit suspicious, that's where the rockets are. And they're also remote activated, so it's like very hard to completely stop it. That's why the IDF is going in there to dismantle and clear out Rafah, and it will take time. It's very hard. It will take time. We need to go house by house, tunnel by tunnel, evaluate if there's civilians, if there are hostages, who are the Hamas terrorists, who are the Palestinian innocent civilians. They're going to leave civilians tied up in houses, which this is something that they did in other places in the Gaza Strip. You know, where I've been, they've tied old people to their beds, hoping that the IDF will see like the civilian as a terrorist and destroy the house. We helped a grandma, like an old lady that was tied to her bed in Khan Yunis.
It's terrible.
It was very sad.
I think there's a sad element to that question too, which is that it's really easy to create rockets. It takes a water pipe.
Very cheap and very
It's very cheap. It takes a water pipe, a fundamental understanding of chemistry, access to the right or chemical compounds, or just
agricultural usual materials basically.
Yeah, or they've you use dud bombs that fell on the ground from previous operations. Use the explosives from there, and they have done that. What it takes is really a change of government in Gaza for the people to stop launching rockets. Because as long as there's a government that encourages violence, the threshold for the continuation of acts of terrorism is very, very low. It doesn't take more than a handful of people with the know-how and the training and a little resources to forever be in this cycle of violence.
Yeah, true.
And this wasn't the topic of this, but going back to our previous topic is you really have to have a change of heart on the government level and a change of the identity of the people. Both on like the personal level of like who they think that nation is, but also how they act, what their value set is to stop the violence.
No, definitely. That's the situation, and it's sad, but at the moment, if you want to have a successful career or life in the Gaza Strip, you need to be employed by Hamas into the terror ecosystem, either be a digger or a rocket launcher. These are like positions. These are jobs.
Or a nukhba terrorist.
Yeah, a respected jobs. Or a ground terrorist, or like somebody.
Or in business with them.
Yeah.
Or in business with them.
Yeah. Or
they do that too.
Definitely. Yeah. Or you can have a factory of manufacturing missiles. Yeah. It's a very good business in the Gaza Strip. At least it was before this war.
So something else we didn't touch on is the economic effect of this war on the Egyptians. And we talked about the corruption side of it. We've talked several times about how it's affecting Israel, and I think we've only seen a small part of the effect it's going to have on our economy and our people long term. We'll see that in the next quarterly report from the Bank of Israel. But it's affected the Egyptians to a great degree, and we talked about this I think briefly a couple episodes back. The Egyptian economy is a weak economy. They're an enormous people group, over 100 million people. Their economy has suffered greatly during this war. It suffered because of the Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea that have really slowed down the traffic through the Suez Canal, which is a huge lifeline, economically speaking, to the Egyptian people. They've lost tourism big time. They've lost tourism repeatedly over recent years, both in the Arab Spring and then COVID and then this. And then obviously like terrorist attacks by ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula in 2014, and before that in sometime before that. I'm trying to forget what it was, 2011 or 2012.
Yeah.
Forget the year. They've had a long series of sort of setbacks economically speaking. Huge population, big problems with corruption, big problems with the economy, big problems with employment, and then this war sort of adds on to it.
Yeah.
And clearly, I mean, you can see the financial tie, but also, you say this, we like going into the heads of the guys at the top, and never-ending pressure.
Yeah.
Never have any pressure on them.
Definitely, especially for Sisi.
Yeah.
For the president of Egypt.
Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. So, okay, so what's the edge? Let's go in the head of Hamas leaders. Okay, this very dark head. Like, what are they trying to gain? I mean, so we cut off their lifeline of weapons.
Yeah.
What's their goals now? I mean, sure.
I mean, they still have a lot of weapons.
Yeah.
And they, so here's what they know.
Okay.
They still hold on to a bunch of hostages, both dead and alive, Israeli hostages.
128 approximately. Maybe 40 of them are alive, and the remaining are.
We don't know, but it's let's say a combination of both. We don't know how many they actually have possession of, how many are somewhere.
How many are bodies? How many are
some
alive,
are physically lost somewhere. Anyway, let's say over 100 hostages. They still have them in their possession. They still have another group of hostages, which are called the people of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, the Palestinians.
About 2 million people that live in the Gaza Strip, that are, even though many of them are in cooperation with and collaborators of and combatants of, it doesn't matter. They're hostages of an evil regime, terribly evil, terribly diabolical regime, the Hamas regime in the Gaza Strip. And those people are in the Gaza Strip, and as far as Hamas is concerned, their suffering serves their end. They want them to suffer publicly. They want them to suffer from starvation. They want to see the images of dead children and adults, in international media. And they'll even do it themselves if they need to, because it serves their purpose. And again, we talked about this earlier. They are a cult of death. What they breed is death. What they live, what they create, the fruit of all their operations is death and destruction. Mm-hmm. And that's their end game. Their end game is death and destruction. Yeah. They're not aspiring to a new economic era. They're not aspiring to educate all the children of the Gaza Strip. We, the Israelis, are aspiring to that. They aspire for the death and destruction of the people of Gaza. They aspire for the death and destruction of the Jewish people. And if we're not here, they'll find someone else to hate on.
So basically what you say is that as this war progresses and more goes.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
They're a terrorist organization. They're a radicalized Islamic terrorist organization. They aim to terrorize you and terrorize their own population, and they've done both. Mm-hmm. They've terrorized the people of Israel. They've terrorized the people of Gaza. They've received headlines and an international response that I believe is greater to their aspect, greater in positivity than what they were expecting. Yeah. Waves of anti-Semitics around the world
university campuses.
Coming out and saying, from the river to the sea and hating on Israel, etc., etc.
Yeah. So basically, they think that, they can withstand the suffering, and they know, of their own people, but the international community cannot, and Israel cannot. So they want to basically make all the pressure and the suffering to the extreme now. So that's what we're going to see. Yeah, we're going to see more images of civilians being killed. We're going to see more desperate attacks of terrorism, more brave or suicidal attacks against the IDF, because they know that the Israelis and Israel in general, it's very hard for us to keep this war because we care for each life of the soldiers
and the Palestinians.
And the Palestinians.
We work
and
very,
the international community
yes.
does not want to keep, pouring in money and aid. They want to just stop the suffering no matter what.
Yeah, and I'd say at the same time, even though it's demonic and even though it's evil and even though, it seems irrational to us, on their side, I'm convinced there is a thought process. I wouldn't call it rational because their value set is so opposite to what we hold to. But they are thinking about the day after.
Yeah.
And they are thinking about who's going to rule the Gaza Strip in the day after. And they are thinking about how, they're going to maintain control of the Gaza Strip and its people. And how they're going to maintain control over the trade happening in the Gaza Strip, which sort of explains why they've attacked some of the border crossings, because any goods that come into the Gaza Strip not through the Hamas is against Hamas.
Because it lowers their
revenue.
Value and the revenue they get from selling it to their own people.
Yes. So they are thinking about these things in a maybe not logical, but a linear process. How do we gain control? How do we maintain the power over the people? How do we continue the flow of money and goods into this area? And I'd say probably on a certain level, like how do we self-preserve? Maybe not even on a personal level, but as an organization.
Organization and ideology.
Yeah. How are we still here the day after? And as far as they're concerned, we've seen this in past conflicts. Whatever happens, they're going to try to frame it as a victory over Israel.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, that
sure.
is sort of a guarantee. It's ingrained in their culture to spin whatever defeat they experience, whatever death they experience, as always, well, we might have all died, but at least we killed a couple Israelis in the process.
Yeah.
That's how they've always looked at the world in the past.
Yeah, and let's talk about the victories that they're gaining in the international community. The world really wants this, conflict to end at any cost, and we can see that just by looking at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Okay, so they make a good move by issuing arrest warrants against Hamas leaders, which are known terrorist organization.
No, they're convicted terrorists.
Convicted terrorists of murder that served their time, were released in other deals, and kept killing, taking hostages, and doing unimaginable things on the October 7th. And then, okay, that makes sense. But then at the same time, they issue arrest warrants against the leadership of Israel, the only democratic state in the Middle East, a state that is fighting according to international laws and according to international standards. Before we launch attacks, we warn the civilian population, we call them, we fly with planes and throw leaflets telling the civilians, okay, get out of this neighborhood, we are about to come in. Who does that? I mean, what?
Only we do.
Yeah, who does that before they launch a war? I don't know. I don't think that the United States did that in Afghanistan or in the battle against ISIS or other countries in general fighting against Germany. I don't think they did that, in big areas. I don't know exactly, but I think that we are definitely doing above and beyond in order to protect the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. But this is a war. You have to win the war. And people die in the war. Yeah. It's very sad, but...
So engaging with the International Criminal Court and some of the UN organizations, not all, some of them do good work and many of them don't. And I'm not the only one to point this out. Let's be honest here. Fighting with them and also in the public arena with the Palestinians is like wrestling with a pig. You get covered in mud and they enjoy it.
Yeah.
They enjoy tarnishing our name. They enjoy dragging us down into down to their level, which is the level of death and destruction.
Yeah.
And the International Court, I'm sure some of the people there have good interest, but some of them don't.
Yeah.
And the ones who equate between the actions of Israel and the actions of the Palestinian Hamas fighters, they're not living on the same existence field as we do. You have to be morally corrupt. You have to be morally crooked. You have to hold on to an alternative set of realities to even think that those two are the same. And what they try to do is pull us down into this conversation of you've committed war crimes, down into this conversation of what you're doing is just as bad as what Hamas did. And they're trying to make muddy the waters of reality.
Yeah.
They're trying to make murky the clarity between good and evil. And there is a distinction between the two. Yeah. But they believe, and it's worked relatively well up till now, that if they throw enough mud in every direction, it's going to stick. And now suddenly you, who've done everything you can, including putting the lives of Israeli soldiers at risk for decades. This is not...
Yeah, it's not new.
I've experienced this in both of us, in every encounter we've had in the army. We're always risking ourselves to protect the other side.
Yeah.
And we've done the same in the Gaza Strip. And then to equate that to what Hamas is doing, and for them, that's a win. For them, the fact that there's a chance, it's not a given, that some Israeli dignitary, former prime minister, former minister of defense, some countries will be, off limits for him. That's a win to them, because now they've brought you down to their level, the level of lowlifes, of terrorists, of people who have no respect for life.
You need to hide, and then you need to, make excuses, protect yourself for defending your own people.
Yeah. But look, the International Court is this very bizarre conversation. It's an organization that was set up to mend, the atrocities of World War II.
Yeah.
That's the later. It started even before that. It was to help the oppressed. It was to help the weak. But in reality, oftentimes, because of the structure of it and the veto rights that different countries have,
super politically.
It's politicized. Yeah. It's politicized. And since the establishment of Israel, the UN, generally speaking, the UN General Assembly, specifically speaking, and many of the aid organizations within it, give Israel a disproportionate amount of negative attention.
Yeah.
And by disproportionate, I mean not a little more, not 10% more. I mean 50 times more than other countries. They'll condemn Israel for one person being hurt in a violent clash between, whatever it is on the Palestinian side and Israeli soldiers, while at the same time ignore a genocide that's happening 2 countries down the line, down the road.
Yeah.
So they're a very biased organization. The U.S. has been very quick to point this out many, many times in the past,
definitely.
As is Israel. We're also not signed in some of the treaties that they sort of relate to when they
also
they pass
the United
Israelis.
States is not.
Yes.
So we have a backing from the United States, and really thank God for that.
Look, I think I used to really spend a lot of time on these topics. What a lot of people forget, and I think even I forget this, is the majority of countries in the world are not democracies.
Yeah.
Really, that's the reality. The majority of the people that live on the face of the earth don't live in a real democracy. And they live in a pseudo-democracy or a dictatorship.
Yeah.
And those countries' agenda is not to promote the values of freedom, freedom
to preserve the leadership.
Yeah, freedom of rights and peace to all. It's the exact opposite. It's to maintain their power over their people. And they use the institutes of the UN and the international organizations to divert the conversation to other topics that are not them. Not what I've done to my people, what Israel is doing in Gaza.
Exactly. What the only democratic country in the Middle East is doing to the poor Palestinians that attacked them.
Yes.
It's basically like blaming, so let's go to...
It's victim blaming.
Yeah, let's go to 9/11, okay? So Osama bin Laden was in charge of this terrorist attack against the United States. It was like the biggest terrorist attack in the history. And then the United States launched an attack against Osama bin Laden. Nobody is blaming the United States now, but this is exactly what's happening to Israel.
The International Criminal Court did.
They did also? Yeah, it actually helps my point. Good. So basically, it's the same thing. Okay, so I guess, we understand that this was wrong, and the response was because of something that a terrorist initiated, and you have to respond to terrorists.
Yeah.
Okay. And
look, but that's sort of like the diplomacy of international law, is where it's like a game board where the board continues to move every time you make a point or a discussion, and they'll say violence is prohibited unless it's in self-defense. So perfect. I was acting in self-defense, but except when it's you who's acting in self-defense.
Because you're way stronger, so it's not fair. You need to take the punches.
Because you have computers and technology, it's not really self-defense. So you're still at wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, now they killed my civilians. That's true, but except when they speak Arabic and you speak Hebrew, now it's not. I'm joking, of course. That's not what they say, but it is ridiculous to that degree sometimes.
No, definitely. It's like saying that, okay, so they killed your civilians, but you cannot now go and destroy all of them because of the terrorist organization that is controlling them for dozens of years. Yeah. It's all because of you, because of the education, the occupation, because of a million years of blah, 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 blah.
Look, let's summarize the topic. I think this event in the border with Egypt, it highlights the complexity of relations in this part of the world. The complexity of existing in a country like Egypt does, and the tension that the Egyptian people have as a government with the Israeli government over the presence of the Hamas in the middle and the international influence that's trying to set on fire this entire region, be it the Iranians, be it ISIS before them, be it the Muslim Brotherhood within Egypt, that for decades, again, this is decades upon decades, have been trying to set fire to the fire keg, which is the Middle East.
Yeah.
And they've succeeded on multiple events. And this event points out how tenuous the relationships are and how important it is to separate between what is good, what is bad, and then be able to have an adult conversation about what's really happening right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that, for us, we need to focus on the situation on the ground. For us, in Israel. We need to complete our missions and basically destroy Hamas in Rafah.
Yes.
Okay? Find our hostages, find the leadership of Hamas, and destroy them, so that there will be a future for the Gaza Strip. And for the Gaza Strip means for 2 million Gazan civilians that are being held and kept hostage.
Yes.
Okay? So I think that this is a point, okay, also strategically, also politically, but also spiritually. We always go back to the spiritual aspect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you are asking, I mean, how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, please consider praying for wisdom, for the leadership of Israel, for the leaders of the United States, for all the leadership involved, for Egypt, for the leadership involved in making these decisions that will affect and shape the Middle East for many, many years. And then for the Israeli hostages and for the IDF soldiers who are actually being fighting or kept in the Gaza Strip and in Rafah. So that's, I think, a major point that we need to...
Good job of wrapping it into a positive direction, Yair.
Very positive, yeah.
I feel like at the end of some of these conversations, you're like, all I have left is just faith in God's sovereignty.
Yeah, listen.
Because everything else is so complex.
It's true. What can you do?
I think this is a good chance, though, to invite our viewers, who hopefully enjoy this content if they come every week. And I'll tell you guys at home, if you're listening or watching this, that this is a good chance to subscribe. Subscribe and share. There's an ongoing battle over the international opinions of people around the world, wherever you are, by the way. It doesn't really matter what country. Yeah. So take a minute right now. You can just pause this video or the podcast, share it, copy the link, send it to 1 friend, 2 friends, 3 friends, post it on another platform. Or make sure you subscribe so the next time we have more content and you want to learn more about the next topic, you make sure to not miss the content.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this was very informative. I mean, I had a good time discussing this with you, Mati, even though it's hard topics. Okay, so as we said in the beginning, this podcast is meant to talk about a specific topic, a specific headline that you see every day in the news, like the Rafah tunnels and the cross-border tunnels between Gaza and Egypt and the IDF operating on the Philadelphi Corridor. So now you have more information on this topic. You know where it is, what are the dilemmas, what are the problems that Israel and that the international community need to deal with in order to destroy Hamas there. It's not simple ever in the Middle East. But if you like to know more, you would like us, Mati, myself, and our team here in Israel to create more content of what is happening in Israel, please consider making a financial donation by clicking the link on this YouTube channel or by going to our website at www.tbn.org/Israel. And in general, if you want to see more content and help us share the truth from what is happening in Israel and in this region, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and share it with as many people as you know, that more people will know really what is happening in Israel, in the Middle East. This is a spiritual battle. We need your help in sharing the truth. So thank you everybody for watching us, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel.